Dad is and always will be my living, breathing superhero. Bindi Irwin, Australian television personality, conservationist, zookeeper, actress, and daughter of the late Steve Irwin. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture, except for today. I am restarting my Dad Talk series where I bring on dads and just have a chat about being a dad. The goal of the show is to elevate dad voices. That means no debate, no argument, just two dads talking about what it's like being a dad. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in so early. And joining me today is Jeremy Kauffman from the free state of New Hampshire. So let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Kauffman. Jeremy, how are you?
I am doing great. I'm not normally on my first coffee of the day when I'm doing a podcast, but I think it's going to bring some real energy, some real
Right.
dad energy.
I mean, how many dads are actually up at this morning? Like probably many, getting ready for
Probably
the
many.
day,
Yeah. I am
you know.
normally up now. I'm just not normally doing a podcast. Yeah.
Right. So fun times. And it's funny. I tell people, I'm like, this whole podcast at 7 a.m. started primarily because of my son, because I was trying to figure out, like, okay, when can I do a podcast consistently? And when he's awake, it can be tough, especially when I started it early on because he was way little. And so his attention that he needed would just be sporadic. Like he'd be fine for 10 minutes and then all of a sudden he'd be, screaming. Then he got a little bit older, and now he's 5. So now I've got him like trained. I'm like, all right, son, when you wake up, if mommy's at the gym, you just come right into daddy's office. And so then he'll come in and sometimes you guys will see him, run across the screen or whatnot. So, and then he'll sit and play in the room for a while. So now we're in good shape. But now I've got my routine. 5 a.m. I get up and start preparing to talk politics at 7 a.m. Except for today.
Well, I think having a routine is important when you're a parent, and it's important for your children. I guess we should start though by doing I should do like my dad roster. I should list my guys and my girl. But I've
Right.
got
Let's
a
do
I've
it.
got a 6-year-old boy, a
Okay.
4-year-old boy, sorry, a 5-year-old boy, a 3-year-old boy, and a 1-year-old girl. Um,
Nice. So four
yeah,
kids.
4 kids. Yeah, and I live in Manchester, New Hampshire, which is the largest city in New Hampshire, but is a smaller city, kind of suburb like for as someone who came from a larger city.
Right.
Um, and I am I am a liberty dad, so I am a
Right.
liberty oriented guy, and so I do care about raising my kids in a way that is consistent with my values.
Hmm.
And I'm also a very like evidence oriented person. I'm a nerd. I have a science background, and
Okay.
I want to know what works and what doesn't.
Hmm.
Um, because I think it's of course as a dad I do care about my children and their outcomes and this kind of thing.
Right.
So I guess that's my intro. That's my dad intro, which I've never done before because I don't go on podcasts as a dad. So that's my first
Right.
ever dad intro as well.
Right. It's awesome, and here it is. I get to be the one that gets it. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, so when you let's talk. Okay, so I don't remember all the ages you said, but it sounded like you said somewhere between 1 and like 7 or something
One
like
to
that.
six, yeah, one
1 to
six,
6.
six
Okay,
about to turn 7, yeah.
gotcha. So I have heard from many people that have more than that, like have like 3 or more children. They're like, because me, I'm like I have one, and sometimes one is a challenge because he just like he's got like I got a lot of energy, but he got a lot more. He has so much more energy, and I'm no slowpoke. Okay, I'm still in good shape, but so I'm just like, man. So I hear from parents that have 3 or more kids that it actually is easier once you get around the 3, 4, 5, or more because they start taking care of each other. Is that your experience as well?
I think that's definitely true. And I think that happens very early. Like as soon as you have one older child, the younger child will want to spend a lot of time following the older child, copying the older child. So, when you have your first baby, that baby is entirely oriented on you. As soon as
Mhm.
you have your second baby, a decent amount of that second child's orientation is going to be on the first child, copying and learning from the child as well as the parents. I do think this is my first two were fairly close. They're about 19 months apart. And it's actually quite nice that they can get paired up at times in ways, so we can get both of them into the same gymnastics class or get
Right.
things like that, which is actually as a guy who likes who has a sense of economics, let's say.
Right.
I like that it's let me do some of those things. I think the marginal difficulty of having children decreases now with a 6-year-old and a 1-year-old. Already the 6-year-old can help at times, and is um and is relatively like eager and interested in doing that.
Right.
Of course, that's also something we've tried to cultivate. I will say, wait, I gotta say, I can't promise no arguing. You said earlier that there's
Okay.
no arguing on the
Well,
show. I want to argue. I mean, you could argue with me. I disagree with me. Like
right.
I think that's interesting. Things can come from that, and as I'm certainly I have opinions
Right.
about parenting, like I do about a lot of things, but I'm ultimately humble about it too. I think it's a really hard thing, and so I might be getting it wrong, and so that's a cool part of having a conversation is especially with someone where there's mutual respect. You say, hey, if you thought about this or what about that, or
Right.
I read this or that, or and I think that's good. So yeah.
Yeah, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's really more like because I've had dads on that are not part of my liberty circles. So I met a guy in a dad group on Facebook, and I don't know, we exchanged a few things in a thread, and then I was like, hey man, you want to be on my show? And he was like, sure. So I try to bring on even dads that I've never ever met, and I always want to try to keep it kind of lighthearted so that like I know somebody like you isn't going to be intimidated by somebody like me, right? Like, because we know each other already for first and foremost, and then you're used to arguing with other people. But other dads, that may not be their thing. So I want to make sure that they feel like, oh, okay, I'm not going to come on there and talk about because I've had dads talk about all kind of topics. I had a guy come on and talk about his challenges with mental health because he had bipolar and he had 2 daughters and a wife. I had one dad who come on, this one was really tough. He came on and wanted to talk about, what it was like being a dad of a trans daughter. So I just try to keep it lighthearted so dads feel comfortable coming on here and saying like, "This is who I am as a dad, and DL's not gonna just beat me down over it."
Totally. Okay, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about my situation. So
Sure.
I live in New Hampshire as part of this free state movement, this movement to concentrate libertarians in
Mhm,
one place. Um, Part of the reason I moved here is
mhm.
because uh, my wife Rachel and I were planning to have children, and as someone who kind of sort of was interested in the evidence even from before I had kids about people and how they work and why they become who they become. Uh, you know, I found there was a lot of evidence to support this idea that the community that they're raised in is actually the single greatest or one of the greatest, if you don't have to buy the single greatest, but there's some evidence that it's the single greatest choice you make as a parent.
Mhm.
More impactful than almost everything else that you're doing is who are you surrounding them
Right,
with? Because they will take some things from you, but they're going to take it from their overwhelming culture.
right,
Not that we need to even go down this direction of it, but the trans thing is an example of people want to blame this or that. They want to blame the schools or they want to blame, and the reality is it's 20% this and 20% this and 20% this, and it all
right.
adds up to be this pervasive, kind of cultural thing, and this shapes us and who we are. And so, I think if I want my kids to grow up with certain values, I want to find as many people who share them, so that those are kind of natural values. And some of
Right.
them that are different, I think, is we're probably more trusting with children towards risk.
Hmm.
We're probably more permissive in certain ways. We're probably more more accepting of children's variations and differences.
Hmm.
So if a 5-year-old has the same math ability as this 8-year-old, just have them do class together.
Right.
Rather
Okay.
than being overly age and track focused. There's certainly more unschooling and homeschooling, as well as private charter schooling. The schooling that's used can be there's quite a mix, I would
Hmm.
say, among people here in terms of what they do. We're homeschooling currently, although I think as they get older, I could see there being more benefits to
Hmm.
um, um, to even more structure. And we already have some structure for them now, where they're doing various classes. So they're
Hmm.
expected to do essentially a couple of units a day. The 6-year-old is already. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think instinctively most parents recognize on some level that the community that you surround yourself with is important. That's why, like, you hear about, like, in Jacksonville, a lot of parents left and they went down to a neighboring city because of the school district, right? And like that's a very common one. Sometimes people, when they're looking for houses, they want to know about the neighborhood. One of the selling points of our neighborhood is the fact that we have a lake in the middle of our in the middle of our community, a big, huge lake, and it's about a mile around. And in the evenings when it cools down, kids and people are walking, riding their bikes, and that's one of the things that I really like about it because I want to like I enjoy and not on a weird creepy level, but I enjoy here when I because I work from home, I enjoy hearing kids outside playing, you know, and because to me it's that sounds like a good neighborhood that I want my son to be able to live in. He can go out and play with his friends. They can run around and, get into whatever trouble they're going to get into. So I think there's a level of instinct that parents have that's on that level. Maybe not as deep thought, about everything, but I think that we all strive for that. And personally, I'm old school, so I'm hoping that when he gets a little older, one of the neighbors, if he's doing something he's not supposed to, will yell out the door like, "Don't make me call your dad," because that's the kind of community that I want to be in, where like the neighbors are kind of just not being snoopy, but like keeping an eye out, like taking a look out the window and just making sure everything's cool. And if it is, it is. If it's not, then I'm gonna call your mom. So,
Yeah, absolutely. So there's that sort of, just generally having a, sort of general pro-social, vibe, where people are looking out for one another, which I think you'll find in New Hampshire, but I think you can find that in like lots of places. That's not an
right,
exclude. That's something where, honestly, fortunately, most of America still, I think, is that way in a lot of uh core and important aspects.
right.
Um, so, but yeah, I think absolutely that's essential. And yeah, I don't know. What do you wait? So you have you have a 5-year-old.
I
How
do.
old is he?
He's 5. Yep,
So what
he's
are you doing for does he do a school? Does he go to school regularly, daily?
yeah, this is where I get in trouble with the libertarians. So he goes to he'll be going to a charter school. He actually just got accepted. Now it's funny
Yeah,
that you ask
yeah.
because
Go ahead.
my wife found out just how snobby I am about public schools. I don't think she realized the depth of it. So let me back up a little bit. I'm a libertarian now, and anybody that knows libertarians knows that we have very strong opinions about public schools. Mine actually started when I was a conservative because I kept seeing peers that were graduating that were just simply not ready to graduate. I remember dating a girl and like her ability to write, and like she sent me an email and I was like, who sent this? Like a fifth grader? And she was like 19, right? And it's like, and I'm not trying to trash her. I'm just trying to say like she graduated not prepared, and then she was struggling to try to go to college, and it wasn't even like an elite college where the rubric was extremely demanding. It was just like a simple college, and she was struggling with it. And so it really turned me off, just all my observations and experiences growing up, because I went to Catholic schools, I went to private Christian schools, I went to public schools that were on the nicer side, I went to public schools that were not on the nicer side, and I would never send my child to one of those. Wasn't quite inner city level, but pretty close. So I got a wide view I got a wide experience with schools. So when we were going around, so he was in VPK, which kind of doesn't really matter. You just pick one, and you send them there, and they do whatever they do. Then we were going around, and I initially wanted the Montessori school here in Duval, and but they do the lottery system, and so then he got accepted into this charter school, which is actually a pretty nice charter. Like, nobody ever says anything bad about this charter school, and it's known to be a pretty good school. So I was excited, but along the way, we toured a couple of schools, and I walked away, and I was like, "Would you see how the parents were dressed?" And I was like, "I don't know about, sending our kid there." And she's like, "What are you talking about?" And I was like, "Well, if they're dressed like that to come to to a school meeting where it's literally parents coming to meet the teachers and have a walkthrough," I'm like, how else are they raising their kids? And she was like, I think she even called me like a bigot or something like that. Like, so it's kind of
No,
weird
that's
because
exactly right. Because that's actually so under sort of my thesis of what of what matters. That's actually what you're buying more than anything else is the peer cohort. It
right,
is right. That is what is arguably as important as the teacher.
right,
Right. So I think those things matter. I think those things matter a lot. I am actually, my opinions can be kind of heterodox under libertarianism because I follow the evidence, and I think libertarians have the same kind of tribal thinking that any other tribe does. And I think
right.
at times this can be too reflexively anti certain types of schooling. Honestly, my read of the evidence is that almost nothing matters. It's like shocking how little the type of of it, and so you get these selection effects in both directions. So like the homeschoolers will trot out this data about, well, like, look at the homeschool outcomes, but also what ends up a lot of this is, well, the homeschooling parents were smarter, and their kids aren't, and their kids aren't average children. And so if you want to really be scientific about these things, you need to find ways of attempting to see what's the actual value add,
Right.
because we're not blank slates. Like, I've done well teaching my 6-year-old math. But I don't think I'm a miraculous math teacher. I think I've let him go as far as he can go, and I also was very good at math, and so were my parents, and so were my
Right.
wife's parents. And so how much of this, so yes, we've been able to get him and to third or fourth grade level, but this isn't some miraculous curriculum. This is just an ability that was there that we let him pursue.
Right.
And so it's a mix of this. So all right, I'll give you an example. Here's a I like this analogy of what some education is, and this is where education can go wrong.
Okay.
And this isn't just like traditional education, but all kinds of teaching your kid. So suppose I did an experiment with my 2-year-old when he was about to turn 3, and I would do math lessons with the older boys, and he would want to do a math lesson. And
Okay.
so uh, every time I gave him a math lesson, I literally just had him practice, could he count to 3?
Okay.
That's it. We'd put 3 objects, and that's it. That's the only lesson. Now he could count to 2, and so there's this phase, I'm sure you remember, where they can count to 2, but they can't count any higher. And so it's
Right.
just 1, 2, and that's all that they can get. And so for about 2 months, probably, he could count to 2 and not 3. And I probably, just as an experiment, did this with him 30 times or something. We did, or more. We did, we do the lesson at 1, 2, and he can't get to 3. And then one day he can get to 3. Right? The next one day, all of a sudden, he can get to 3. Now, that at some point, that lesson had to happen. Like, it's not that he would have never learned to count to 3 without having the lesson, but most of those lessons were worthless. They weren't, they didn't actually, there wasn't something adding up. There was a capacity that needed to happen. And only once that capacity was there could the lesson, sort of, be achieved. And so what you want to think about with your kids when you're sort of like educating them and teaching them is, to what extent am I doing something where there's genuine development happening, where there's progress happening, right?
Mhm.
Or am I doing the equivalent of just measuring their height every day and checking if they're tall enough?
Right.
Because there is, and so, because sometimes some aspects of public schooling and just schooling and lessons generally fall too much into that category. And so when you're teaching and doing lessons for your kids, it's like, if there's not progress happening, you rotate the ability to do something else. And don't fall into this trap of what, And I was of I'm just I'm just measuring,
Right.
your height. Yeah,
What we did before
what
he
do you
started
know
going to
now?
school was kind of follow up, and it was unintentional. Like I'm no science guy. I don't really sit down and think about it. We just kind of do. And so we were kind of following almost like a Montessori-esque type path. If he showed interest in something, then we would explore it with him. Period. And it didn't matter what it was. I mean, like he started showing interest in light sockets. I'm not the outlets. And so I was like, all right, well, son, I mean, they're there. I mean, we got to deal with it. So I was like, this is how you do it. And we started letting him plug in like the iron or, something like that. And then under supervision. And this was like when he was like, I don't know, 2, 2.5, 3, maybe. I don't remember. It was very young. And my theory behind it was that if you don't if you allow them to explore and then show them how it's supposed to be done, you minimize the maybe what you might call unnecessary curiosity. Like, what happens if I put a fork in it? Because what he learns is this is how you do it, and so now he wants to plug everything in, and he's looking for things that look specifically like a plug. Now that doesn't mean that he didn't try to put other stuff in there at some point, but mostly he was putting in the plug. And I actually learned this. I kind of got this idea at a vineyard, believe it or not. My wife and I, before we had our kid, we went to California on a vacation, and were touring a vineyard. And there was a young girl there. She must have been 25. She couldn't have been very old. And she just blew my mind with how much she knew about wine and grapes and growing them and the temperature and the soil. And she was just like, she was just blowing my mind. And I was like, you can't be that old. I said, how did you come about all this knowledge? And I was like, did you go to school or something? And she said, when I grew up, she said, my parents were very much wine enthusiasts. And she said, ever since, me and my siblings could hold a glass of wine, we would get a splash of wine in our cup and we could drink it. And then our dad would say, write 3 things that you taste down on it. And so then she said, fast forward when she went to college, because she had grown up with this understanding of this is how you drink wine. You don't overindulge. You enjoy the sensation. You think about the flavors. She said when she got to college, the idea of getting drunk just didn't make sense to her. So she was like, I was always the DD. She said, I never got drunk, even though all my friends did. And I've heard, and I could tell you tons of stories that are similar to that, where it seems like the more you allow them to explore and help them, the less that they go bananas when they get their first chance on their own, right? Like they tend to learn a little bit of respect and say, okay, well, this is how you use this thing, how you approach this, whatnot. So that's kind of what we did. Just in whatever he wanted. If he wanted to come out and play with my sander while I was doing something in the garage, okay, well, let me show you how to play with the sander, son.
Yeah, totally. I think that's generally correct, or I think that's correct. I think everything you're saying is correct. That you can trust, you can largely trust their intuitions about risks, and you want to be encouraging them to explore the area where you're basically, when things get too novel, and that's where intuitions get less trustworthy. But certainly
Right.
anything that we've had sort of a decent evolutionary experience with, we really can, I think, both our intuitions and our children's intuitions, will generally be, um, will generally be pretty good. I mean, one of the things I will say, like I am wary about, and I don't, not that this is what you were trying to say at all, but one of the things I think about, as my kids are getting older, and with various aspects of 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 modernity, I suppose, technology and things like this. Although we're generally pro technology in this family,
Mhm.
um, but what are what are the healthy practices that I should be enabling? Because I do put this in the category. Some of this stuff is clearly in the category of ice cream or something like this, where
Mhm.
or pure sugar, where uh, I can't trust my children's instincts. Like they did not have the evolutionary equivalent of like, oh, have cups of sugar, have unlimited cups of sugar whenever you
Right.
want, right? Like
Right.
no one would have would do this with their children, right? And so this idea that we can trust their instincts with something that with a type of stimulus that's particularly novel,
Mhm.
uh I think that then you do have to get a bit more intellectual about it, I think,
Right. Yeah, and there are like, so I was giving you the example of tools. So there are things that are off limits. Like he doesn't get to touch the table saw. Not at all. Right? Like you stay away. And I tell him, I'm like, this is for big boys. Right. And then when you get bigger, and so I try to manage things based on what I think is age appropriate. Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes I might push the boundaries a little bit, but a little bit. Like, I'm not like, all right, son, you're 5, you can stand on a stool now, so why don't you cut this piece of wood on the table saw? Like, no way, like, that would be insane. But, like, I remember I posted a picture a long time ago where, we had a walk, and I had his hand on the handle, and then my hand over his hand, and then I had him holding um, some sort of spoon, like a wooden spoon or something like that, and then I had my hand over that, so I had full control of his hands, and and we got a picture of him stirring something in the walk while and it was hot and everything, but I was controlling his hand, and this was about 3 because he wanted to explore it. So I was like, all right, well, the safe way is for me to control your hands because we've got something hot here. And I posted that picture and somebody was like, yeah, I think he's a little bit young for that. And I'm like, I think he's fine. But
Yeah.
but I do think that, yeah, that you can't go full on with their intuition, and sometimes it's a flat no, table saw, but sometimes it's a if I hold your hand, and sometimes it's okay, well, let's see what you got, right?
Yeah, well, actually, fire and sharp objects are things we have lots of evolutionary experience with.
Right.
So I still put those in the category where I largely trust my children around. Uh, they need to be, shown certain things, but yeah, we let them use knives sharp enough to
Mhm.
to cut themselves, to slice their
Yep, same
fingers,
here.
and they cut vegetables and participate
Yep.
in cooking. And that idea of having them either whether they can literally participate or whether they can sort of play participate, where so if I'm doing something, if I'm doing home improvement work and they can't literally help me, okay, here's the hammer and nails,
Mhm.
and you practice your you can do your practice while daddy does
Right.
does his, and so we absolutely do that. And same thing at hemp, like we let them do activities that are realish or real.
Mhm.
Another benefit that comes from this is if you cultivate the value that various things are family activities, that the chores are things that they're participating in always. They've
Mhm.
all that they've always participated in chores, putting away the
Right.
clothes, but they're always so that will be entirely normal for them. At no point have they not. You're having them participate from such a young age that when they're first participating, it's honestly slowing you down a little bit.
Right. Yep.
But that way, it's entirely normalized, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think that there's a there's a value in exploration, and that's my big thing is I always want him to be comfortable trying something new. As much as possible. I mean, if, as he gets older, there will be things where maybe he is just hesitant, and that's fine. I mean, if he decides that he's hesitant to go base jumping, I'll be comfortable with that, right? But ultimately, I don't want him to ever fear anything, and especially when it comes to learning. That's a big one for me. Now, I don't have any cool degrees. I'm just a guy that likes to read, and I can read very well. And one of the things that I noticed about a lot of people, and I have this theory, and I'd be interested in your take. When I was mentoring a young kid, he was like 15 or 16 at the time, and he was like, "I hate reading," and I was like, "What?" I was like, "You hate reading?" Like, and I tried everything to get him. I was like, "Dude, just read a sports page, anything. I don't care if you read Harlequin romance. Like, dude, just read something. We'll go with that." But here's my thought. I think what happened was he at some point did not keep pace with reading. And so therefore, what ends up happening is the things that he would be interested in reading as he gets older are actually above his capable reading level. And so therefore, the translation of I hate reading, even though he may not know it, might actually more be like I have trouble with this and it's intimidating. So therefore, I don't want to do it. And maybe he expresses it as I hate it. I think the same thing is when people say, "Well, I hate math." I think they didn't keep pace for whatever reason, and that it becomes intimidating because most people aren't asked they're not like, "Oh, I'm afraid of a quadratic equation," right? Like that's not what they're just intimidated of like regular math sometimes. And so I want him to never be intimidated by the possibility of learning something new. So it's like, "Oh, you want to, like, we're learning the piano right now. And, we've learned to do, gardening and this and that, and I just want him to constantly be exposed so that when he gets older, whatever he decides he wants to get into, he feels confident, like, I could probably do that. I just need to figure out how. That's it. And that's my big goal for him."
Uh, yeah, absolutely. So I think the phenomenon you described is very real and does happen. And I think that it can be a mechanism of avoiding development in an area, which
Mhm.
children you absolutely will do. They are intelligently lazy at times. I don't know if this makes sense. Like
Oh,
they
yes.
will if
Oh, yes.
if you're giving them a way to get away with something that saves them energy or work, like they
Mhm.
will sort of clever like find it out with a certain amount of sort of intuitive cleverness or whatever. Or now, I don't even know if that's the right way to put it, but I think what I'm saying roughly makes sense. And so, yeah, there are times, and this is where again I'm not on the well, I'm sort of squarely not on the. You should give children a lot of initiative, a lot of choices, but
Mhm.
there are absolutely times where, as a parent, it's entirely your job to overwhelm their choices, to give them a
Mhm.
shove, to be or setting various strictures and disciplines and
Mhm.
so on. And so I've kind of we have a sort of like barbelled, I guess, strategy almost where they're given a lot of and will be continued. They're given a lot of free play time, and there's
Mhm.
a lot. There's a decent amount of self-directed time and choice. But then when there are things where this is a requirement,
Mhm.
this is how it works in the family, and this is just a rule,
Yep.
and it
Yep.
will be enforced relatively stringently, and so that tends to be it's like very much things in sort of one and so mostly not strict stuff, but when we're in the category of things that are serious or expected or whatever, there's no getting out of it. And so that's something also I think libertarians who don't have kids can be naive about at times. It's like it's your job to be the authority, and this idea that you can treat children like little adults is not real and not a thing.
Right. Right. No,
So
he's my son is very smart and very capable in many areas, but he's still 5. At the end of the day, he is still totally 5. And we do have some, some non-negotiable things, right? Like the other day, this is just a small one. I started him on I found out that Duolingo has, like, reading, app, like, learning to read. And I was like, "Oh, cool, like, let's check it out." And so we checked it out, and I actually kinda like it. It's actually pretty neat. And so he was going through it, and on one of the little lessons that they have, what they would do is they would have, like, a sentence with a bunch of blanks, and they would have maybe 5 words that go in the sentence, and they would say it out loud, and then he's supposed to pick the one that, like, if it's like, "Tim jumps on a log," then they might say that, and he's supposed to pick Tim first, and then pick on. And I noticed that he was just randomly hitting them. And I was like, no." I was like, "We're not guessing." I was like, "You think about it, and you think about which one comes next." I was like, "Don't just hit a bunch of buttons until you get it right." And so I was like, because I'm like, if you're gonna do something, you need to do it right. And and he will find these lazy ways sometimes to kind of go through it. And I'm like, "No, no, no." I'm like, "Daddy's still old enough, that you can't outsmart him so easily. So we're not gonna. I mean, maybe when he's 16, he'll get one over on me, but he's 5, so I still have the advantage." And
Yeah.
I enforce it. I'm like, "No, this is how I want you to learn, and you have to do this." And sometimes I've kind of insisted on piano lessons, and his piano lesson isn't but like 15 minutes or something. That's not exactly very long, but I do, yes, enforce it, and make it a requirement, like you said.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing is entirely appropriate. As they get older, my expectation is to give them even more say in some of their choices around various curriculums, but they need to be pursuing excellence or expertise or
Mhm,
talent, or in some, I'm very open-minded, but it's not the way some of the that some parents, and this can totally be the downside of uh some versions of unschooling and so on, where you'll see, like, the parents are like letting their kids do incredible amounts of just videos or video games. Although I think it is a mistake to, and this is maybe something we could pivot to after this, talking about, like, it's a mistake to categorize screen time as this as one thing.
mhm,
Um, but yeah, you have to be doing this kind of thing we started, actually, we've been tracking it now for around for most of this year, where we're
mhm,
just logging, what unit, what was sort of practiced with intent, or what units happened that day,
mhm,
so we
mhm.
can track how many days are happening of the and sort of measure where they're at and see how they're doing over time. So yeah, I think that kind of stuff is good. You want to talk about screen time, because
Yeah,
I think this is an
yeah. So
interesting
so
topic.
tell me your perspective on it, because I mean, I think every parent has one. So
Yeah.
I
So
have
I
one, you
don't
have
I
one?
don't like the categorization of, like, screen time as a thing. I think, like, there's really big differences. Like, there's very between screen time when you're using it for lessons or even playing certain types of games,
Mhm,
than when it's a pure passive activity of just watching something. And even
mhm,
inside of the watching something, you can categorize further in terms of you know how informational it is versus pure that sugar, the eating raw sugar. like
right.
like there's the raw sugar example of TV. Is there's I love occasionally let my children watch this show that's like, it's entirely like slapstick comedy with this bear and these bugs. I don't even know I forget what it's called, but they would literally sit there and watch it for hours. It's nothing but like, I don't know exactly why it's such sugar to their brains, because I can't even watch it. But
It's like the Teletubbies or something back in our day.
no, it's like yeah, I don't know. It's not. It's like
Right.
it's comedy. It's like kids comedy, but it's
Okay.
nothing but slapstick animal,
Okay.
like, physical comedy of and so, but how, to put that in the same category of my children, doing a Khan Academy math lesson doesn't make any sense. The Khan Academy
Right.
math lesson should be categorized the same way as them doing math out of a workbook.
Right.
And so all right, so everyone accepts that. But then I think certain types of video games can be are closer to the Khan Academy side of things, where that doesn't mean you should let them play it for 4 hours, because letting them play it for 4 hours, uh, the benefits, there's not continue to be these benefits, probably cumulatively, but like the video, if you give a kid a video game, and the only way you can get through it, if you have your 5-year-old a video game, the only way you can get through it is to read the words on the screen. It will facilitate his reading.
Right.
Or we've found some, like, logic and puzzle based games that, like,
Mhm.
there's no way the way that it's clearly getting the kids to think is very much analogous
Right.
to logical thinking, programmatic
Mhm.
healthy, adapt, good kinds of things. And so I think it's thinking about what are they getting out of the screen activity. Even, again, video games, it's not don't video
Right.
games is not one category of thing. What's the game?
Right.
And so just thinking of it much more that way, and then putting it on the continuum of how much is this pure passive sugar versus it's engaging them in some way that's healthy.
Right. Well, I mean, it's the difference between, grapes and a candy bar, right?
Yeah.
Is kind of how I would think of it in terms. But I agree. It's funny. I started out with the idea that screen time was screen time, all of it, right? And that's and I did start out that way. And now I still kind of look at it like the totality of screen time, and I want him to get outside and go learn to do other things, and have a variety. And me personally, I think it's healthy for him to have some screen time and then have to get outside and go play, go throw a rock. I mean, maybe not throw a rock. We got a lot of windows at that, but go out and just do something outside, ride your little bicycle, jump around, play with, he's got an art table, go do something on your art table, go in your room and play with some toys, do something physical. But I do think there's a value in video games and, in other things. And sometimes even just regular TV shows that seemingly would not be teaching him something. I actually learned by surprise one day. We were upstairs and we were getting this. He was like 3 or something like that. He was, and he couldn't he didn't have a huge vocabulary. And I was going downstairs and I was like, "Here, why don't you carry this and I'll go down and I'll carry this." And he's like, "Okay, we're teamwork, Dad." And I was like, "What?" Because I hadn't taught him that word.
Yeah.
Right? So, there was this weird realization because not only did he understand the concept of teamwork, he was able to actually use the word, not entirely correctly, but very close. Because he's like, "We're teamwork," and I was like, "Yes, we are." And I was like, "Wow," like, he understood, he's helping me, and he learned that, I think, from, like, Paw Patrol or something like that, right? Like, something that I wouldn't think necessarily that he's learning from. But it's funny that you mentioned video games. He loves Minecraft. Oh my God, does he love Minecraft? He's got Minecraft t-shirts, Minecraft toys, Minecraft video game. When he watches TV, like his favorite YouTube stuff is to watch like people narrating Minecraft. Like they'll play the game, but they'll narrate it like it's a movie. So he loves watching those. Um, but he actually learned some very hard lessons in Minecraft. I think you're familiar with it, right?
Yeah.
So for
Yeah.
anybody that's not familiar with it, it's just a building game and everything's kind of blocky and square, and you interact with creatures and stuff like that. So there's a thing called a wolf in there, and you can tame a wolf and make it a dog, basically. And the thing about it is if you start hitting it, then it will become a wolf and then it will attack you back. So I told him, I said, "Don't hit things, like chill out." Because he was just, and he wasn't trying to be violent. He was just like, "Oh, you can hit things and then something will happen, right?" Like I hit a pig and I get a pork chop. Like, so it was just like, it wasn't violent in that sense. So he starts hitting the wolf, and I was like, "You need to stop." And then the next thing I start hearing growling, and I'm not really paying attention. And then all of a sudden, I hear the sound of him being hit in the game, and then he starts getting upset, and then he died, and he started wailing. And he was like, "Oh, the dog, yo." And I was like, "I told you not to do that." And I was like, "Now you need to play the game." And I was like, blah, blah. And I insisted. I gave him like virtually no sympathy. I mean, I didn't like yell at and scream it, but I didn't really give him any sympathy either. I was like, "I told you not to do that." And I think that gave him a good understanding of consequences, from a video game, which, I mean, if you're going to learn about hitting a dog and the consequences of hitting a dog, video game seems like a good place to have it happen, right? As opposed to, I don't know, real life. So it's
Right.
very interesting. Like I agree with you. But I do still look at the totality of it. I think I told him because I can be very blunt with my son. And the other day I actually said this. Um, I was like, "Hey, you've had enough TV time." I was like, "You need to go outside and play." I was like, I said, "You're not gonna be one of them little Korean kids that plays video games all day long and then dies of dehydration." I said, "Go play."
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think I think yeah. Again, you're exactly right here. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. So we put it in the mix, and sometimes some certain screen time that's for lessons or certain types of activities they can do proactively. Screen time
Mhm.
that's sort of recreational.
Yep.
They only will get if they've completed their obligations and and everything is put away and and then that's limited on top of it. So basically,
Mhm.
like if there's free time and everything else is done and everything's good, then they can have some sugar version of screen time.
Right.
And that's basically how we do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Same thing here. Like sometimes his
So
mom
that's an
will be
interesting
like,
question. So that's something where parents have different opinions about how much, to the degree to which you should use um
now let me
sort
ask
of
you, are
direct
you
rewards.
do you maintain like specific times every day, or do you just kind of play it all averages out? So some days my son doesn't get any TV time because he's busy, we're running around, we're doing things, and then by the end of the day, he just didn't get any because we were busy. And then other days we're not very busy, so maybe he gets a little bit more and we say, okay, well, overall it's kind of averaging out to about where we want it to be.
Yeah, that's right. Some days they definitely get none. I would say the median day they're getting 30 minutes. They're getting like one
Okay.
show. And then, but certainly on a Saturday, it's not uncommon to watch an entire movie, or things like this. And so,
Mhm.
adding that time up, I'm sure it's probably an hour a day or something,
Mhm.
um, of time in that category. Honestly, I don't think this idea, I think it's more, but I would worry less about avoiding that stuff and focus more on the positive stuff. In other words, like if the choices for my kids were 1 hour of passive screen time and like no structured lessons, or 3 hours of passive screen time and like 2 hours of like important structured, like I would pick that one, right? Because I
Right,
think
right,
if you're going, it's a rare child who doesn't need any you know who doesn't really need any structure, I think.
right.
And so I don't think I don't think screen time should be mostly thought of as like not less actively harmful and just like not benefit. It's just sort of time that's somewhat wasted. But
Right,
they're kids; they're gonna waste a lot of time.
right, right. I mean, he
And,
wastes time putting his socks on, right? We're like, "Hey,
yeah,
time to go," and he's like playing with the sock, and it takes him 5 minutes to put on his socks and shoes because he's playing around.
yeah. Yeah. So, and they like it. It's something, here, another great use of screen time. My children, if I put them on the couch, they will not move. They will just be
Right,
there. Okay.
right.
So so mostly we try to involve them in things, but if there's ever a time where you don't, yeah, it's very
Right,
reliable way of having your children, stay occupied. And they really like it as well. So if you keep it as something that's measured,
right.
they're also uh, it's also something that they're happy to take as a reward. Oh yeah, and so this is what I wanted to ask about. It's like how this idea of like explicit rewards, versus so this we try to not have too much ongoing regular quid pro quo, but
Mhm.
certainly as like a training mechanism, we've done it. And some things we do just have been like, ongoing small quid pro quo with the kids where it's like you
Mhm.
get a starburst.
Right.
This is a regular transaction that I have with my children where there are certain things that like they know if they do this they will get a starburst. And so I don't know, to me the world does actually work that way, right? There are things you can
Right.
just go out and do for money. And so this idea that I'm teaching them some sort of bad lesson by being too explicit with rewards at times, I'm like, I'm not too sure that that's true. And so we just kind of do it. It's worked. For example, this is one where we transition it, but it worked great. We told for our kids if they were in the car and buckled before us, they'd get an M&M. And
Okay.
they would be slow. So if they get their shoes on faster and get in and get buckled before mom and dad got their seatbelts on, they got an M&M. And man, that sped up car loading time substantially. And then we just
Right.
stopped giving them M&Ms and they stayed fast.
Right.
And so things like this, uh, we've done that despite some people saying they don't like doing that. And so I was just kind of sharing.
So,
Uh,
no, I've done it.
yeah.
I've done it, and I've done it in an area where people probably would be unhappy with me on. Um, he was potty training, and then we got to the point where like, all right, well, he would only wear pull-ups at night, and but through the day he wore underwear and he was good to go. Like we didn't, he rarely made a had an accident. And so then I was like, all right, well, how do we get this, how do we do this overnight? And so I showed him, I don't know if you remember, it's what's it called? It's a pop-up game with a bunch of little perfection, the game perfection, where you have all the little pieces that are in different shapes. And then you push the board down and you put a timer on it. And then you have to beat the timer to put the pieces into the hole. And then if you don't, it'll pop up and knock them all out. Right. So I showed him this video and he was like, that's really cool. And I was like, would you like that? And he's like, yeah. I was like, all right. I was like, you need to have 7 sleeps of no pee in the bed. And because he understood it as sleeps, not like, nights or whatever. And he was like, okay. Now, initially in my mind, I was thinking 7 consecutive. And then I realized very quickly 7 consecutive was going to be way too hard. And he might lose interest or feel defeated very quickly. So I didn't. So what we ended up doing is I just went with 7 and then we actually marked it. And so within a week and a half or 2 weeks, I can't remember exactly, but it was within a week and a half or 2 weeks, he got his 7 marks or whatever. I think we used magnets. I put magnets on a thing. Um, and so I got the game and I gave it to him and I was like, "All right." And then he has almost never peed the bed ever since. And I was like, I don't know if you're supposed to do that, but it worked. He's never been scolded for peeing the bed, like, that's definitely off limits, like, like, it just happens, and, like, if he does, he comes in, he's like, "Hey, dad, the bed's wet." Like, "Okay, let's go take care of it." But that basically potty trained him, and I'm like, "I don't know, maybe I was supposed to do that, maybe I'm not, but it worked, and I ain't complaining, so whatever."
No, that's a great example. And we did that similar something similar with one of our kids to transition him where uh he not coming in. Well, actually, what it was is he was coming in crying because he wanted to go to the bathroom, but it was like months of trying to get him to learn. It's like you're
Right,
crying because you just want to go to the bath. like, like I know it's hard, but like you just have to go to the bath. If
right,
you have to go to the bath, the toilets, the lights on, just will help you. And so we just started giving. We gave him a reward in the morning if he did it without help, and all of a sudden he didn't need the help at night anymore. And so it's
right,
like and then it went away. And so I yeah, I think this kind of thing. Obviously you want to have some things in the category of expected, obviously.
mhm,
And I'm so think about what category something is in. And so, I gave that car seat example, and maybe we should have put that in the expected category. And if you don't do it,
right,
things happen. But their expectations, like, my kids empty the dishwasher in the morning. That's an
mhm,
expectation that they have to do that before breakfast, in the same way that mom and dad have responsibilities,
right,
as part of maintaining the home, and that's one of theirs. And so, but once I found that once something is in the expectation category, there's like almost never any um fighting about it once it's into that category, once it's just normal.
Right.
They
Yeah,
set the table for dinner, they
right.
empty the dishwasher, things like this.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times when we use the reward to try to motivate him, one, it's to motivate, and so, like, going back to the potty training overnight, the reason I even did that is because I was like, "Well, he needs to consciously think about it. How do I get him to consciously think about it?" And so I was like, "Well, I know if he when he wants something, that's all he thinks about." So I was just kind of playing on, like, his already existing behavior, like, okay, if you say, like, because if you tell a kid, if you say, "I'm gonna take you to the ice cream store in 2 days," they will not forget that. And they will tell you every day. They'll be like, the next day, they'll be like, "Daddy, in 1 day, we're going to the ice cream store, right? Next day, we're going to the ice cream store today, right?" Like, they'll wake up and the first thing, like, "We're going to the ice cream store, right?" And you're like, "Yes." And so they latch on to these promises. And so I was like, "All right, well, that'll get them to think about it. Like, I want this game. So therefore, I'm gonna be thinking about this particular behavior that is wanted." But then I found it easy actually to transition away, right? Because I've not had to, like, he hasn't gotten a single thing for, after that, for potty training. Like, that was it. That was the only time he got something for potty training. Like, we didn't use it because he was able to get it, through the day a lot easier. And then, but even other times, like, we were learning to ride a bicycle, and he was having a struggle of a time, mostly getting it started. And and so then he almost didn't even want to ride home. We're at the park around the corner from our house, and I was like, "Well, I have my bicycle, and you have your bicycle. I don't want to carry both of them or walk home." So I bribed him. I was like, "All right, look, if you ride all the way home, no crying, and I said, and you don't fall, which I knew he wouldn't fall because once he gets going, he's fine." I was like, "I'll let you have 2 ice creams today instead of just 1." And then, like, the next day, he's like, he asked about having, I was like, "No, it was just that one day." And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he was fine with
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
So
Right,
I find
right, and I think
transition
that's
isn't
the
that
line.
hard.
It's like it's using it to transition or to get something extra, or
Mhm.
something like that. It can be okay. Um, uh, uh, but then it can become, an expectation. And
Right.
so that's where where I think it can be a particularly useful
And I think
kind of tool.
the thing that we also do is that even when we do something kind of out of the ordinary, there is no expectation on like, he is learning that there is no expectation that there is an expectation. So sometimes we'll go to the store and he'll see something and be like, "Dad, I want that." And sometimes we get him, something, and sometimes we're like, "Nah, you don't need anything. You're fine." And so he learns, like, there is no expectation that he's definitely going to get something, right? So we kind of stay, I guess, if you will, in control,
Yeah.
rather than, because so we're into real estate, and one of the things that you learn in real estate is you either you train your tenants, or they train you. So I kind of look at children the same way. You train your children, or they train you. I see an
Yes.
awful lot of trained parents out there.
That's exactly correct. Yeah. Yeah, that's another one where I'm of two minds. So like I'm very I want to have like a pro-natal and a pro child culture. And so to me that means um basically extreme tolerance towards
Mhm,
children being you know loud in public spaces or being
mhm.
obnoxious, this kind of thing. At the same time, honestly, I feel like 80 to 90% of the time it's like the parents are doing it to themselves because
Right,
they don't, they're inconsistent with how they manage their children, or they reward, the wrong kinds of behaviors, or this kind of thing. But I still completely tolerant of it. So I'm not saying like I'm like saying the
right.
parent like, hey, I'd rather you. I'm glad you're a parent. I just, so like I just wish you could learn. There's so many rewards to consistency. I think
Mhm,
as a parent, where if you are, just this is the way it is, and you enforce it, like firmly and consistently, then your children will accept it, or they'll push back, once a year or once every
right.
6 months, just to make sure that it's still that way. Versus if you're, and I'm not saying, hey, there are, you're saying, hey, when we go to the store, sometimes they get something, and I think there are areas where that's totally fine. But of course, what you're inviting there is them to ask every time, right?
Right.
Which can be fun. You have the discussion, and it is good to have things in life that are lucky and random, and this kind of and this kind of thing. But yeah, you get what you incentivize.
Yeah, there's a I'm gonna try to be intellectual here. There is a term that gets floated around every now and then called stochastic terrorism. I'm sure you've probably seen it. I like to think that I practice stochastic parenting. So, like, my behavior is kind of predictable, but it's also kind of random at the same time,
Mhm.
because I try to keep him guessing in a sense. Like, yeah, I remember a long time you were talking about, like, parents outside, and maybe they're not doing such a good job of something. I remember a woman at, like, the store, this was years and years ago, and she was like, I don't remember her kid's name, but she was like, "Hey, Johnny, don't touch that. Johnny, 1, Johnny, 2, Johnny, 3," and then she started over, and I was like, "Wait a minute. No, no, you got to 3." Like, and so what I do is I'm all like, I'll tell them, and maybe I'll say, "All right, that's 1." And then maybe I get to 3 and maybe I don't, right? And maybe, and I'll raise my voice or something like that. And I'm like, "I said no," whatever. So I try to keep him guessing so that he can't game the system, because if I'm too predictable, then, because he's a smart little kid. He figures stuff out. And it's like the parent, it's like the kid that's like, they go ask mom and they don't get the answer they want. So they go ask dad and get the answer they want. Or they just go straight to dad in the
Oh,
first
that's
place.
not allowed. That's not
Right.
that's not allowed. Intentional arbitrage
Right.
is itself a crime.
And so
So
we will say, "What'd your mommy say? What'd your daddy say?" Right? Like,
yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
and sometimes daddy will say yes, and sometimes daddy will say no. Same thing with mommy, right? Like, it's not like the consistency is that we're consistent in how we treat him, in how in discipline, which is almost rare. It's almost never, because he's actually such a good kid. Um, but we try to be consistent, but then we try to be inconsistent in other areas, and it's not by design. Like, we didn't sit down and plot this out. It's just kind of like how it worked out. But we try to be somewhat inconsistent in parenting, so that he has to engage rather than manipulate, I guess.
Mhm.
And then sometimes he doesn't win. It's just the way it is, because that's how life is, son.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And I encourage my children to like argue and negotiate, because that's
Oh,
the
my
kind of
wife
like
loves it when he negotiates.
so like they're welcome to do that. They do have to generally. So we try to be clear about whether things are like requests or
Right,
commands, essentially
right,
orders, and not be ambiguous with uh, language. So like we try to not, if something is not a question, we try not to ask it as one, and so and that kind of thing. And then if it's if we are, and again, we're probably less commanding in general than a lot of parents, but if it's a command, then hey, you got to listen.
right,
We'll talk to you about it forever. Like one of my rules is like, I will explain to you why this is a rule for as long as you want. But
right,
you have to follow the rule first. We can talk about
right,
it forever, but we can't talk about it until you follow, until
right.
you're yeah.
It's it's
And then
the
you can change my mind.
right,
You can convince my mind to change the rule if you think you should be allowed to do this thing, or if you think the rule should be different.
right.
We can talk about it.
Yep.
Um,
It's the I'm not asking, I'm telling.
yeah, yeah.
So, all right, man. Well, we've come up to our hour. I don't want to hold you too long, and I definitely have to get to work. It has been fabulous having you on. Any last words?
I will be at PorkFest with my parenting group. We're hosting a bunch of events for any of your
Awesome.
listeners who will be at PorkFest, come and say hi and meet some New
I will.
Hampshire parents. And if you won't be at PorkFest and you have kids or thinking about having them, New Hampshire is a great place to raise them. So come on out for a visit sometime. You can reach out to me, or my wife. We're both very friendly towards Liberty parents.
Awesome. All right, Jamie, I'm gonna put you backstage, and I will also be at PorkFest. So I'll see you in about a week and a half or so, roughly somewhere around there. So give me just a moment. All right, folks. I hope you found this episode inspiring, informative, and even a little bit of fun. Remember to join me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. Eastern. You can find me on YouTube or Rumble, whichever you prefer. Let me pull that up here. I'm a little bit off my game today. All right. So there it is. You can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can go to rumble.libertydad.com. But whatever you do, I want you to remember that if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great weekend. Catch you next week. But for now,